The jungle filled the entire window of the descent shuttle, an endless green sea that rolled and shifted as if it had tides. The canopy was so dense that the explorers could not see the ground. Shadows pooled beneath the towering crowns of alien trees, but the crowns themselves sparkled faintly as though they were dusted with stars. From this height, the faint shimmer seemed random, a trick of light catching broad leaves. Yet as the shuttle dropped lower, the shimmer revealed itself as real. Some of the plants had grown surfaces that glowed with captured sunlight, translucent sheets pulsing gently, giving the impression that the forest itself breathed. Isolde pressed a hand to the window. Her breath misted against the transparent surface, and she forgot for a moment that she was thousands of kilometers from the blue oceans of her birth. "It looks alive," she whispered. Malik, seated across from her, raised an eyebrow. "Everything looks alive to you, even rocks if you stare at them long enough." "This is different," Isolde murmured. "You'll see, it doesn't just grow, it listens." From the rear of the shuttle, Ari knelt with a tangle of straps, securing the equipment crates. He gave a low chuckle without looking up. "Let the botanist dream. I, for one, just hope there's solid ground under those leaves. If we land in a swamp, all my instruments will corrode before we can unpack them." Commander Eitan did not join the banter. He sat upright, hands clasped loosely on his knees, eyes trained on the display above the forward window. It showed descent telemetry, gravity slightly heavier than Earth, atmosphere rich with oxygen and heavy with water vapor. Lightning sparked in distant clouds. The commander had led 3 expeditions before, but this planet was different. There had been an almost magnetic pull in the Council's decision to send them here. Something in the readings from orbit had whispered of possibilities far beyond ordinary exploration. The shuttle broke through a mist layer, and the canopy rushed up toward them, no longer a featureless expanse, but a living quilt of enormous leaves, flower clusters larger than sails, and tangled vine bridges that stretched from tree to tree like veins. The shimmer intensified. Some of the leaves bent in unison, turning their luminous sides upward as if greeting the descending vessel. "Did you see that?" Isolde's voice leapt. "They moved together." "Wind," Malik muttered, but his eyes betrayed unease. The air outside had been still. Eitan raised a hand, silencing them. "Landing sight ahead, brace yourselves." The shuttle's thrusters flared, scorching a clearing into the canopy. The explorers gripped their harnesses as the vessel sank through the last tangle of branches. The ground revealed itself at last. Soft soil, carpeted in mosses of brilliant emerald and streaked with strands of glowing fungi. Fern-like plants uncoiled and recoiled as if disturbed. A chorus of insect-like trills rose and fell, surrounding the shuttle. The landing struts touched down with a muffled thud, sinking slightly into the moist ground. The engines powered down. For a heartbeat, there was only the ringing in their ears. Then the jungle sounds surged back, chirps, clicks, groans of shifting wood, and something deeper, a thrumming rhythm that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Isolde unfastened her harness and nearly stumbled to the door, though she waited for Eitan's nod before opening it. The ramp unfolded, and a wave of warm, damp air rolled inside, carrying with it the rich perfume of soil and flowers. The explorers filed out, boots sinking into spongy moss. Malik tilted his head back, staring up the colossal trunks that vanished into mist. "This forest is absurd. How can trees grow this tall with gravity like this? Perhaps they help one another," Isolde said, kneeling to examine the moss. It sprang back against her fingers as if resisting her touch. She smiled. "They're not separate here, they're linked. You can feel it." Ari crouched near a vine as thick as his arm, adjusting the settings on a handheld sensor. The screen lit with flowing lines of energy signatures, complex and overlapping. "These readings are unlike anything I've seen. The entire ground is alive with current, not just roots. The soil itself carries charge." Eitan paced slowly, surveying their surroundings. His boots left no prints in the resilient moss. The commander's voice was calm but carried weight. "Remember why we are here. Observation first. No interference until we understand the balance of this place. We will set camp by that ridge. He pointed toward a rise where the ground sloped upward into a cluster of boulders. The rocks were half buried in vines, yet their faces gleamed faintly, patterned with lichen that pulsed with color. They set to work, unpacking tents woven of reflective fibers, driving supports into the forgiving earth. Isolde kept glancing toward the trees, distracted by movement that was not merely wind. Leaves tilted as she passed. Flowers swiveled toward her shadow. Once she thought she heard a whisper, not in her ears but in her chest, a gentle pressure of soundless words. By evening, their camp was secure. A small fire crackled at the center, flames tamed by a containment ring. The light seemed pitiful against the jungle's own luminescence, for many of the plants glowed softly once night fell, turning the clearing into a starlit grove. They gathered around the fire. Ari was busy adjusting his instruments, setting them to record atmospheric data. Malik had already sketched diagrams of several plant structures, his notebook filled with curling leaves and roots. Iton sat quietly, eyes always scanning, posture relaxed yet alert. Isolde hugged her knees, gazing into the glowing dark. "Do you hear it?" "Hear what?" Ari asked without looking up. "The rhythm, like a heartbeat, low and steady." They fell silent. The jungle sang with countless tiny voices, but beneath it, indeed, there was a slow pulse, resonant and deep, felt more than heard. It throbbed through the ground, into their bones, into the flames' flicker. Malik frowned. "Seismic activity?" Ari shook his head. "No, the readings show no tectonic movement. Whatever it is, it comes from the living matter." Iton's gaze lingered on the shadows between the trees. "Then we will listen. Tonight we are guests. Tomorrow we begin to understand." The jungle pulsed once more, slow and patient. Around them, the canopy shifted as if the entire forest inhaled. And somewhere beyond their sight, in the depths of that green ocean, something stirred in answer to their arrival. Dawn crept into the clearing, not as a gradual lightening of sky, but as a chorus. The jungle awoke in layers of sound. First came the distant booming of some immense creature, low and resonant like drums. Then the chatter of winged things weaving through the branches. Finally, a shimmer of notes unlike any earthly song, rising in spirals as if the very plants sang. The canopy glowed faintly, leaves shifting their hues from silver green to deep emerald as the sun's warmth touched them. Isolde was the first awake. She slipped from her tent barefoot, toes curling into the moss. The ground was warmer than she remembered, as though the soil itself had stored the fire's heat. She breathed in air rich with sweetness, like crushed herbs, and tilted her head back. Droplets of water fell steadily from the canopy, not from rain but from the leaves themselves, as if the forest exhaled dew. She moved slowly, whispering apologies to the plants she brushed with her hands. Some drew back shyly, others leaned toward her. A cluster of translucent flowers, pale as frost, opened as she knelt, releasing a perfume that was almost too fragrant to bear. She closed her eyes and inhaled deeply, half dreaming. Already lost to the forest, Malik's voice teased softly. He emerged from the tent behind her, rubbing sleep from his eyes. His hair was a disheveled halo. He held a tablet against his chest, ready to sketch before breakfast. "Not lost," she said, smiling. "Welcomed." He snorted but lowered himself beside her. He reached out to touch a flower and flinched when the petals folded quickly, withdrawing into a tight bud. "Sensitive plants, reflex arcs maybe, I'll need samples." "Not yet." Isolde's hand hovered protectively over the flower. "Let them show themselves first." Malik gave her a look somewhere between annoyance and fondness, but did not argue. By the time Ari and Iton joined them, the camp was already alive with sound. Insects with translucent wings the length of forearms darted near the tents, buzzing in sharp harmonics. A vine unwound itself from a nearby tree, stretching toward their fire ring as though seeking its warmth. Ari swept his sensor across the clearing. Energy levels remain extraordinary. The soil conducts faint pulses, as if carrying signals. I cannot tell if they are natural or communicative. Iton's expression betrayed nothing. "We document, No interference until we know more. Malik, Isolde, catalog the flora closest to camp. Ari, map a perimeter and record environmental data. I will survey the ridge. They split tasks, though the forest seemed intent on distracting them. Malik crouched by the vine that had crept near the fire ring, sketching its texture. Its surface shimmered faintly, tiny motes moving beneath the skin as though carrying liquid light. He touched it gently with the back of his hand. The vine quivered and recoiled, but instead of retreating, it looped once around his wrist, not tight, just testing. He froze, pulse quickening. Isolde was instantly beside him. Do not pull away, let it choose. I would prefer not to be chosen, Malik muttered, but he held still. The vine tightened slightly, then relaxed, releasing him. It left behind a faint glow on his skin that faded slowly. Isolde touched his wrist. It marked you. It sampled me, Malik corrected, scowling. He made quick notes in his tablet, though his hand trembled. Meanwhile, Ari paced the perimeter with steady steps. His scanner beeped frequently, registering anomalies in soil chemistry, magnetic fluctuations, and faint vibrations timed exactly to the jungle's low pulse. He stopped near a stand of thick reeds where droplets of amber sap hung like jewels. The sap glowed faintly, pulsing with the same rhythm. He collected a vial, careful not to break the reeds, and watched the liquid swirl as though alive. Above them, movement caught Aiton's attention. He stood at the ridge's base, gazing upward. The rock face was not bare but covered in a lattice of climbing plants, their roots embedded deep into the stone. They glowed faintly, tracing patterns across the surface. He narrowed his eyes. The patterns resembled not randomness, but geometry, spirals, branching fractals, repeating hexagons. He reached for his communicator but paused, better not to break the silence. The jungle felt like a cathedral, demanding reverence. By midday, they regrouped at camp, arms full of sketches, samples, and recorded data. Ari set his vial of sap in the shade. The liquid shifted restlessly, as if aware of its confinement. They ate a simple meal, dried rations softened with boiled water, yet even this became extraordinary. As they unwrapped their food, a cluster of broad leaves from a nearby tree tilted downward, spilling droplets into their bowls. The water was clear and sweet, tasting of minerals none of them could identify. Convenient, Ari said dryly. Helpful, Isolde corrected, lifting her bowl with gratitude. The afternoon brought their first encounter with fauna. It began with a rustle overhead. They looked up to see a dozen small creatures bounding through the branches. At first glance they resembled primates, but closer study showed differences. Elongated limbs, translucent crests running along their spines, and eyes that glowed like lanterns. Their fur was not fur at all, but layered feathers, each one refracting light into subtle colors. The creatures halted above the camp, peering down. One let out a series of chirps that echoed like flutes. Another mimicked the sound of Ari's scanner, perfectly pitched. They're watching us, Malik whispered. Isolde lifted a hand slowly, palm open. Hello, she said softly. One of the creatures tilted its head, then repeated her word exactly, tone perfect but strange in the air, as if the forest itself had spoken through it. The explorers froze. The creature blinked slowly, then bounded away, the rest following. Their calls faded into the distance, blending with the jungle's song. They learned a word after hearing it once, Ari murmured. That is no ordinary mimicry. Everything here learns, Isolde said with quiet certainty. Everything listens. Evening returned quickly in the dense forest. They lit the fire again, though its light seemed unnecessary among the glowing plants. Isolde lingered at the edge of camp, listening to the pulse beneath her feet. Malik sketched by firelight, lines hurried, his usual precision abandoned for something wilder. Ari stared at the vial of glowing sap, lost in thought. Aiton, as always, watched the tree line. He said little, but as the others prepared for sleep, he caught Isolde's eye. You are right, he said simply. This place listens. Be careful what you say. The jungle pulsed again, steady as a heart, as if in agreement. The third morning broke with mist drifting low across the clearing. It clung to their tents and equipment, coiling around ankles as the explorers prepared for their day. The air was damp and heavy, filled with the tang of mineral-rich soil. Iton studied the ridge where the glowing vines had etched patterns in stone. His mind returned to those spirals and hexagons again and again. They looked natural, yet not random. Purpose lingered in their curves. Today's objective was the canopy. From orbit, the forest roof had looked like a continent in itself, a green ocean whose waves stretched endlessly. From the ground, the canopy was both invitation and challenge. To see its life meant climbing, mapping, trusting ropes and hands. Isolde could hardly contain her excitement. She ran her fingers along coils of climbing line as if greeting old friends. "The canopy will tell us more than the ground ever could," she said. "It is where the sun meets the forest, where energy and memory exchange." Malik raised an eyebrow. "Memory? You'll see," she said, not offering more. Ari secured instruments to his harness, checking each clasp twice. "We will proceed systematically. Samples every 10 meters, aerial mapping once above the upper branches. If the canopy is indeed a network, I want to see its structure." "Stay close," Iton ordered. "No wandering, no risks. If one of you falls, none of us leaves unchanged." They began their climb. The first tier was simple, trunks wide enough to hold houses, bark rough and grooved, alive with lichen that glowed faintly beneath their touch. The explorers drove pitons into the grooves, their ropes gliding smooth. At 10 meters, the first surprise came. A series of broad leaves formed a platform, overlapping until they created a natural floor. The explorers stepped onto it cautiously. The leaves did not tear or sag, but held firm, swaying slightly like a woven mat. Tiny insects darted across the surface, their bodies crystalline and shining with inner light. Isolde knelt, captivated. "Look, these leaves grew together to hold weight, not chance, cooperation, or accident of density," Malik countered, though his voice wavered. He scribbled notes, pausing often to glance back at the leaves beneath his boots, as if afraid they might shift. At 20 meters, the air grew warmer. Vines coiled like veins, some as thick as their torsos, pulsing faintly as if carrying liquid fire. Ari pressed his sensor to one vine. The screen erupted with lines of data. "This is extraordinary," he murmured. "The vines carry electrical signals, variable, complex, not just conduction patterns. This is communication." Iton looked up through the branches. "Between what? That is the question," Ari replied, eyes bright. At 30 meters, they reached the canopy's edge. The sunlight was filtered through layers of translucent leaves, turning the air golden. Flowers the size of their torsos opened slowly as the humans emerged, releasing showers of pollen that sparkled like falling stars. The explorers stood in silence, overwhelmed. Above them stretched an endless expanse of green, undulating with life. Birds, or something like birds, darted between crowns. Their wings were transparent membranes that caught the light like prisms. A steady wind carried the scent of resin and fruit. Isolde stepped onto a massive branch that curved outward like a bridge. She spread her arms, face tilted toward the golden light. "This is what I came for," she whispered. "This cathedral of green." Malik muttered, but softly, "Even I have to admit, it is beautiful." Ari unfolded a drone from his pack, its rotors whirring to life. He released it, and it rose swiftly, carrying a camera and sensor array. On his wrist screen, an aerial view unfolded, the canopy stretching in fractal patterns, branches woven together into loops and whirls. "These structures are not random," he said, awe creeping into his tone. "They repeat, scale upon scale. The canopy is arranged like a circuit, like the forest itself was designed to move information." Iton frowned. "Designed by whom? Perhaps by itself," Isolde said, running her hand along a flowering branch. "A forest can grow in ways that feel like thought." Their reverence was interrupted by movement. A cluster of small creatures bounded toward them along a branch, feathered beings like those they had seen before. But these carried objects in their forelimbs, fruit pods split open, glowing faintly. The creatures stopped a short distance away and chirped in flute-like tones. One set its pod carefully on the branch between them and backed away. The explorers froze. "An offering," Malik whispered. Isolde crouched slowly, examining the pod. Its flesh glistened, filled with a translucent nectar that pulsed faintly with the same rhythm as the vines. She looked back at the creatures, who watched intently, their eyes gleaming. She took a tentative sip. The liquid was cool, tingling, tasting of citrus and something sharper, like sparks on the tongue. Heat spread through her chest, not unpleasant but startling. For a heartbeat, she felt her thoughts scatter and return, sharper, as if her mind had been rinsed clean. She exhaled. "It speaks." Aiton's hand tightened on his rope. "Explain, not in words," she said, "but in feeling. The nectar connected me, briefly." The creatures chirped again, pleased, then bounded away into the canopy. Ari's scanner chimed. He showed them the screen. Spikes of electromagnetic activity had surged the moment Isolde drank. The vines nearest them had pulsed brighter, and the canopy itself had shifted, leaves turning in a wave outward as though acknowledging the act. Aiton's jaw tightened. "We proceed carefully, no more tasting unknown substances." Isolde smiled faintly, though she obeyed. It was not unknown, it was invitation. They lingered long enough to map the canopy's nearest structures, gathering data until the sun began to tilt westward. The climb down was slower, thoughtful, each of them carrying silence heavy with questions. Back at camp, the forest's pulse seemed louder, nearer, as though the canopy's breath had followed them down. The vial of sap Ari had collected pulsed in rhythm with it, glowing brighter than before. That night, as they lay in their tents, the explorers dreamed not their own dreams, but flashes of green light, spirals of vines, voices without words. The forest, it seemed, had begun to dream with them. The day began clear, or as clear as it ever became beneath the dense canopy. Sunlight slanted through golden leaves, painting the clearing in shifting patches of warmth. The explorers moved with purpose, still buzzing from the revelations of the canopy. Ari calibrated instruments, Malik copied sketches into clean pages, and Isolde wrote notes in a flowing hand, weaving science with poetry. Even Aiton, though silent, walked with an ease that had not been there before. It was Isolde who first noticed the change. She paused mid-sentence, tilting her head. "The rhythm is faster," she murmured. Malik looked up from his sketches. "You mean the pulse?" "Yes, it was slow, steady before, now it quickens." Ari glanced at his scanner, his brows furrowed. "She is correct. Energy surges across the ground, increasing in frequency. Something is coming." Before they could speculate further, the forest itself gave the answer. A groan like thunder rolled through the trees. The canopy darkened abruptly as clouds swelled overhead, churning with violet and green flashes. The air thickened, damp and electric. Leaves twisted upward, exposing their luminous undersides as if bracing for impact. Aiton's voice was calm but firm. "Secure the camp. Tie everything down, fast." They rushed to obey. Tents were lashed to trunks, instruments gathered, crates pulled beneath waterproof sheets. The wind arrived suddenly, a hot breath that rattled the branches. Moments later, rain slammed down, heavy and warm, drumming against leaves and moss. But it was not ordinary rain. Droplets glowed faintly, each one carrying a shimmer like liquid glass. They struck the ground and burst into sparks that sizzled before fading. The entire clearing glittered, as though caught inside a storm of falling stars. Isolde laughed despite herself, her hair plastered to her cheeks. "It is beautiful, dangerous," Ari countered, shielding his instruments. "The rain is ionized. It carries charge." A flash split the sky, followed by a boom that shook the ground. A tree nearby convulsed as lightning struck, yet instead of burning, it absorbed the energy, its trunk glowing brighter, its vines crackling with firefly sparks. The storm raged harder, their tents strained against the wind. The ridge above them began to weep torrents of water, flooding the clearing. The mossy ground sponged until it could hold no more. Aiton scanned the surroundings quickly. "We cannot stay here. The clearing will flood. We move." "Where?" Malik shouted over the roar. "Deeper," Aiton said. "The forest provides shelter. We find it or we drown." They gathered what they could, each shouldering a share of supplies. Rain strung their skin, glowing in rivulets as though painting them with fire. They plunged into the trees. The jungle swallowed them quickly. Branches lashed in the wind, leaves shedding torrents of glowing droplets. The ground became a river, forcing them to wade. Yet even in chaos, the forest seemed to guide. Vines arched downward, forming handholds. Roots rose from the ground like steps. After what felt like hours, they stumbled into a hollow sheltered beneath an immense trunk. Its girth was wider than a tower, its roots arching high to form a cavern. Inside, the air was calmer, though the storm raged beyond. The hollow glowed faintly, lined with bioluminescent moss. They collapsed inside, dripping and breathless. The roar of the storm became a muffled drumbeat. Ari set his soaked scanner aside and pressed a hand to the mossy wall. "It is warm," he said, surprised. Malik leaned back, closing his eyes. "A tree with heating, convenient, not convenience," Isolde whispered. She traced the wall with reverent fingers. "Shelter, the forest drew us here." Iton sat apart, silent, his eyes on the hollow's entrance. Water cascaded outside like a shimmering curtain. He did not voice the thought that pressed at him. Shelter, yes, but also containment. As they rested, the storm surged louder, almost musical in its rhythm. Rain fell in waves that rose and fell like chants. Lightning turned the forest outside into a fleeting skeleton of white and green. Inside, time seemed to blur. They shared ration packs in silence, listening to the storm. Isolde began humming softly, matching the forest's pulse. Malik, restless, traced patterns in the glowing moss. Ari watched the readings from his scanner, even without power, as if willing them to stabilize. Then, without warning, the moss brightened. Lines of light coursed across the hollow's walls, forming spirals and branching shapes. The explorers sat upright, transfixed. "It is answering," Isolde breathed. "To what?" Malik whispered. "To us," Ari said. His voice was hushed, reverent. "Our presence has changed its rhythm. We are part of its pattern now." The lights pulsed in time with the jungle's heartbeat. Outside, the storm's fury began to ebb, the rain softening, thunder rolling farther away. The glowing lines dimmed gradually until only the gentle mosslight remained. Silence fell, broken only by the drip of water and the explorers' breaths. Iton rose slowly, his expression unreadable. "The storm will pass. When it does, we move carefully. This place is not only alive, it is aware." None of them argued. For the first time since landing, the forest no longer felt simply wondrous. It felt like something vast had opened one eye to look at them. They lay down at last, lulled by the fading rain. Dreams came quickly, full of spirals, glowing lines, and whispers in voices that belonged not to people but to trees. The storm left the forest transformed. Morning revealed a world washed clean, every leaf dripping prisms of light, every root and stone glistening. The air was heavy with sweetness, as though the rain had released hidden perfumes. Mist curled along the forest floor, and somewhere deep within, great creatures bellowed their morning calls. The explorers emerged from their hollow reluctantly. None spoke of the glowing patterns they had witnessed on the moss walls, yet the memory clung to them like dew. Their steps were quieter now, as if they feared to tread too loudly on sacred ground. They retraced their path, though the clearing where their camp had stood was gone. The flood had swept through, leaving only a patch of churned soil and tangled vines. Equipment left behind had vanished, perhaps buried, perhaps taken. Malik swore under his breath. Weeks of supplies gone. Iton did not respond. He stood still, scanning the ruined clearing. His eyes narrowed, though not in anger. He saw order even in destruction. The flood had not scattered randomly. It had carved channels, arcs, perfect curves, as if water itself had followed instructions. "Look," Isolde said softly, pointing. The moss that had once carpeted the ground was gone, but in its place grew new shoots. They had sprouted overnight, impossibly fast, forming spirals that radiated outward from the center of the clearing. Perfect spirals, precise as though measured. Malik crouched, frowning. "Growth this rapid defies biology, unless the forest prepared for it," Isolde said. She traced the spiral's curve with her fingertip or in her eyes. Patterns in the canopy, patterns in the rain, patterns in the flood, everything fits. Ari lifted his scanner, now dried and functional. The readings scrolled across his display, sharper than before. Energy levels peak exactly along the spiral paths. The chutes are channeling current. This is not random regrowth, it is architecture. Aiton's jaw tightened. An architecture of what? Communication, Ari said simply, or computation, this forest thinks. They stood in silence, each wrestling with the enormity of the thought. The rest of the day was spent exploring cautiously. They moved deeper, keeping to ridges where water drained cleanly. Everywhere, patterns emerged. On one ridge, the trees grew in concentric rings, each trunk perfectly aligned to the next, like ripples frozen in wood. In a glade, vines arched overhead in lattices that resembled woven nets, each strand pulsing faintly as though exchanging signals. When Malik sketched them, he realized the proportions matched mathematical ratios he had studied in architecture, ratios humans used to design structures both strong and beautiful. At a stream, they found stones arranged not by erosion, but by careful placement. Each rock was covered in glowing lichen, and together they formed a mosaic of hexagons stretching from one bank to the other. The water itself flowed smoothly across the design, slowed and redirected by invisible channels. Someone built this, Malik insisted, his skepticism cracking. These are deliberate structures. No, Isolde corrected, her eyes wide and shining. No one built it, it built itself. That evening they camped beneath a cluster of trees whose branches formed a natural dome, sheltering them from stray drizzles. The dome glowed softly, bathing them in green light. Their fire was unnecessary, yet they lit it anyway, its crackle a reminder of their own smallness. Malik sketched long into the night, his hands restless. I see it everywhere now, he admitted, voice low. Fractals, ratios, repetitions, it is as if the forest is carved by invisible hands. Ari set his scanner aside and leaned closer to the fire. Invisible hands are not required. Systems can evolve toward efficiency. But this exceeds efficiency. It aligns with thought. My readings confirm it. The vines pulse not just randomly, but in sequences, like language. Isolde hugged her knees, watching the glow shift across the dome. Perhaps language is not confined to sound. Perhaps the whole forest speaks at once, with light and growth and rhythm. We simply do not yet understand the grammar. Aiton listened, as he always did, without interrupting. His gaze was fixed beyond the firelight, on the shadows between trunks. He could feel the pulse underfoot, steady, patient, purposeful. At last he spoke. Whether this place grows or speaks, whether it is accident or intention, it notices us. Do not forget that. Silence settled, the fire hissed. Beyond their dome of branches, the jungle's heartbeat throbbed, steady as ever. Isolde whispered into the glow, almost to herself. What if this is the secret of life, not chance? Not chaos, but pattern, a mind woven into the green. No one answered, but none could dismiss the thought. They drifted to sleep uneasily, and their dreams were filled with spirals. Night deepened around the camp, though darkness was never complete in the jungle. The dome of branches glowed faintly, each leaf veined with threads of light, as though veins carried starlight instead of sap. Fireflies, or something like fireflies, drifted lazily, their bellies pulsing in different hues, weaving trails like drifting lanterns. Isolde woke first, stirred by a hush that seemed different from the forest's usual rhythm. She stepped outside the camp dome barefoot, moss cool beneath her feet. The forest was awake, yet still. The hum of insects had quieted, and the low thrum of the jungle's pulse had softened. In its place came something new. The leaves overhead began to glow in ripples, faint waves of light moving from trunk to trunk, not random twinkling, but sequences. One leaf brightened, then another, then a cluster. A pause, then another sequence began. Isolde froze, breath caught in wonder. She whispered without thinking, "It is speaking." Ari stirred behind her. He emerged from the dome, rubbing his eyes, but the sight pulled him fully alert. He raised his scanner instantly. The screen filled with jagged lines, spikes and troughs aligned perfectly with the glowing sequences. Patterns, he said softly, repeated intervals. This is structured. Malik and Aiton joined them moments later, drawn by the glow. Together, they watched as vines lit in spirals, their light coursing downward into the moss. The moss responded in kind, spreading a wave of brightness across the ground before fading back into shadow. It's call and response, Malik whispered, like conversation. Isolde felt tears sting her eyes. It is more than conversation. It is song. The forest shimmered brighter, as though encouraged by their attention. The sequences grew longer, more intricate. Some spiraled outward, others clustered inward. Ari's scanner beeped furiously, unable to process the complexity. I cannot decode this alone, he muttered, overwhelmed. But this is not coincidence. This is communication. The explorers sat in silence, letting the glow wash over them. They did not speak, for fear of breaking the fragile connection. Instead, they observed. Hours seemed to pass in minutes. The forest's bioluminescent displays shifted through forms, spirals, lattices, branching veins. At one point, the lights formed parallel lines that pulsed back and forth like signals exchanged between distant towers. At another, they burst outward in waves that raced across the ground until vanishing into the distance. Malik sketched frantically, though even his quick hands could not keep pace. This is too precise for nature, too coordinated. Even schools of fish do not align so perfectly. Isolde touched the glowing moss near her. It brightened beneath her fingertips, flaring in a burst that echoed outward. A pause, then the vines above responded with a shimmer. She drew her hand back, startled. It answered me, she whispered. Ari frowned. It might be mimicking input, reflexive. But Isolde shook her head. No, it paused, it waited, then it replied. Aiton's voice was low, steady. Do not forget where you are. You touch something vast. It sees you now. The glow dimmed gradually, fading back to scattered motes. The pulse beneath the ground returned, slow and steady, as if the forest had finished its thought. The explorers sat together in the cooling silence, unsure whether to feel reverence or fear. By morning, they were restless. Their rations felt tasteless, their tasks inadequate compared to what they had witnessed. Each carried the memory of the forest's voice. They set out to follow its signs. Ari proposed mapping areas of concentrated luminescence. Malik wanted samples from glowing plants, though Aiton refused to let him cut anything down. Isolde, meanwhile, sought to listen more than act. Their path led them into a valley where the canopy opened slightly, letting shafts of sunlight pierce the mist. Here the bioluminescence lingered even in daylight. Vines shimmered faintly in continuous threads, weaving between trunks. On the ground, mushrooms clustered in shapes resembling letters, though no human alphabet matched them. This is deliberate, Malik muttered. Shapes with order, repeating forms. Ari crouched near the mushrooms, sensor humming. Electrical pulses in sequence, like a printed page. But written in light. Isolde knelt, her fingers hovering but not touching. Not written for us, written for itself. We are only eavesdropping. They camped there that evening, though sleep was slow to come. As night descended, the valley blazed alive. Every vine, leaf, and fungus lit with coordinated glow, weaving a symphony of light. Sequences stretched across the valley like words shouted across a canyon. The explorers did not sleep at all. They watched, spellbound, as the jungle spoke around them. At one point, the vines nearest camp shimmered in a sequence none of them expected. 3 pulses, a pause, then 3 more. Again, 3, pause, 3. Malik's eyes widened. That is a signal pattern, universal distress. It knows code. Ari shook his head. Not distress. Attention, it is calling us. Aiton stood slowly, shoulders tense. Then tomorrow we will follow. The jungle pulsed once more, as if in agreement. The valley lingered in their minds long after the light had faded. By dawn, the explorers were restless, yet hesitant to move. The campfire had burned to ash, its warmth long gone, yet none of them stirred to rebuild it. The forest itself seemed to provide enough presence, humming low, content to cradle them in its pulse. Aiton rose first. He stood at the edge of the valley, surveying the vines that still shimmered faintly in the cool morning air. His hands were folded behind his back, as though he feared to disturb the balance with even the smallest gesture. Malik joined him, yawning, sketchbook tucked under his arm. His eyes were ringed with sleeplessness, but they burned with energy nonetheless. "You see it too," Malik said quietly. Aiton did not look at him. "I see enough to know we do not belong here." Malik chuckled, though without humor. "We never belonged anywhere else either. That is why we came." Behind them, Ari knelt over his scanner, recalibrating its delicate core with careful hands. His lips moved silently, murmuring to himself, as though coaxing the machine to keep up with the forest's impossible rhythms. Isolde sat apart, knees drawn close, her gaze fixed on the mushrooms that had glowed so brightly hours earlier. Their light had faded to a faint shimmer, but she still studied them with reverence, as though she could read meaning in their shapes. When Malik returned to camp, he collapsed onto a log and opened his sketchbook. The pages were filled edge to edge with spirals, lattices, and branching forms. He had drawn until his fingers cramped, desperate to preserve what he saw before it slipped away. "It feels like," he began, then trailed off, uncertain. "Like what?" Isolde asked softly. "Like the forest is not only alive but aware of beauty," Malik said. He tapped one page, then another. "These are not just efficient structures. They are pleasing, balanced, harmonious. A mind that values symmetry built this." Isolde tilted her head. "Perhaps beauty is not separate from function. Perhaps harmony is the most efficient form." Ari snorted, though not unkindly. "Or perhaps we only see beauty because we wish to. Our minds are built to seek patterns even where none exist." But even as he said it, his eyes betrayed doubt. The scanner in his lap hummed with restless energy, flashing sequences too regular to dismiss. Aiton finally returned, his expression unreadable. He gathered them with a glance. "Today we follow," he said simply. "The signal called, we answer." No one objected. The journey took them deeper still, into a part of the jungle where the canopy thickened into a woven roof. Sunlight barely touched the ground. Strange growths hung from branches like lanterns, their glow faint in daylight but steady, unblinking. Malik paused often, sketching, muttering about proportions. Ari scanned constantly, frowning at the limits of his instruments. Isolde walked quietly, fingertips brushing leaves as though greeting them. Aiton led without words, his gaze sharp, measuring every step. By midday, they reached a hollow where massive roots arched over a pool of still water. The surface reflected not just the forest, but also the faint shimmer of light that pulsed beneath, threads of luminescence weaving in the depths like veins in stone. The explorers knelt around the pool, transfixed. "It continues below," Ari murmured, "not just on the surface. The forest extends into water, perhaps into soil itself, an entire network." Isolde's voice was barely a whisper. "A mind that fills every root, every vein, a consciousness vast beyond our reckoning." Malik dipped his fingers into the water. It was cool, smooth as silk. At once, the glow beneath his touch brightened, spiraling outward in rings of light. He gasped, pulling back, but the glow continued, spreading across the pool. The vines overhead shivered in response, pulsing in rhythm with the expanding circles. "It sees us again," Malik whispered. The explorers remained frozen as the display unfolded. Rings of light spread across the water, then reversed, collapsing inward to a single glowing point at the center. The vines above pulsed 3 times, paused, then 3 again. The same pattern as before, the call. "It is not random," Ari said firmly, his earlier doubts fading. "This is deliberate. It is repeating to ensure we understand." Aiton's eyes narrowed. "Then what does it want?" None could answer. They set camp near the hollow that evening, unable to tear themselves away. As the fire crackled, their conversation turned inward. "I thought I came here to sketch a new world," Malik admitted, his voice raw. "But I realize now I am not the artist. The forest is. I am only its student." Isolde smiled faintly. "That is why I came too, not to impose, but to witness, to listen." Ari frowned, gaze fixed on his scanner. "I came to measure, to bring back proof, but my proof escapes me. My machines cannot comprehend this." His voice lowered. And neither can I. Iton sat apart, sharpening a blade that had barely been used. His movements were steady, his silence long. When he finally spoke, his words cut the stillness. "I came to protect," he said simply, "but what am I to protect you from? If the entire world is alive, if it chooses to turn against us, I cannot stop it." No one answered. The fire crackled, the jungle pulsed. Above them, the vines shimmered faintly, almost soothingly, as though acknowledging their confessions. For the first time since they had landed, the explorers did not feel entirely alone. The next morning broke heavy with mist. The forest glowed faintly beneath the veil, as though the world itself carried a hidden lantern. The explorers rose in silence, each burdened with the knowledge of the night before, each unwilling to delay the inevitable path that awaited them. The hollow's pool was calm, its glow subdued, but the vines above pulsed their signal once again. 3, pause, 3. The call persisted. Iton tightened the straps of his pack and spoke with finality. "We follow." The path revealed itself as they moved. Vines shimmered faintly ahead, marking the way. Where the ground was choked with roots, the moss lit with faint spirals that curved into navigable routes. At every turn, the signal pulsed faintly, as though to reassure them they were not lost. "It is guiding us," Isolde whispered, wonder threading her voice. "Or herding us," Iton muttered, though he did not slow. They pressed deeper. The canopy thickened until light was little more than a suggestion, yet the bioluminescence grew brighter, spilling across trunks and branches in patterns that shifted like flowing script. Ari recorded furiously, muttering about code, language, algorithms beyond human design. At one point, Malik stopped abruptly, sketchbook clutched against his chest. Before them, the vines formed an archway perfectly curved, every thread aligned in ratios he knew from architecture. "It is building doorways," he whispered, "not just paths, invitations." No one answered, but all passed beneath the arch in silence. The air grew cooler as they descended into a basin. Moisture clung to their skin, heavy with fragrance. Strange blossoms unfurled along the path, each glowing faintly. They opened only as the explorers passed, then folded again behind them, as though acknowledging their presence. Isolde could not contain her awe. "It greets us." The basin widened into a clearing unlike any they had seen. Massive trunks rose like pillars, evenly spaced, each draped with lattices of vines that shimmered with interwoven light. The ground was bare of undergrowth, carpeted instead with a smooth layer of glowing moss. At the center of the clearing lay another pool, larger than the first, its surface rippling faintly as though stirred from below. The vines pulsed 3 times, paused, then 3 again. The same call, but louder, insistent. They approached the pool cautiously. The glow beneath its surface was stronger, brighter, forming patterns too complex to follow. Circles within circles, spirals folding into spirals. At times the light surged upward, illuminating their faces with pale radiance. Ari dropped to his knees, scanner trembling in his hands. "The energy here is beyond anything I've measured. It is not just a node of the network. It is a nexus, a mind concentrated." Malik sketched frantically, though his hands shook. "This is a cathedral," he whispered, "a cathedral built of living matter." Isolde sank to her knees beside the pool. She did not touch it this time. Instead, she closed her eyes and listened. The pulse was stronger here, resonating through her bones, steady and patient. It was not threatening, it was expectant. Iton stood behind them, tense, his eyes sweeping the clearing. Every instinct screamed at him to guard, to protect, but he felt the futility of his vigilance. How could one guard against an entire world? The pool brightened suddenly, flaring upward in a burst of light. Rings spread across the surface, then reversed, collapsing inward once more. The vines echoed the signal, 3, pause, 3. This time, however, there was more. The vines shifted, adding a new sequence, 2 pulses, then 1 long glow. Repeated. Malik looked up sharply. "It is changing. It is expanding its language." Ari's scanner chirped wildly, overwhelmed. "It is not random. It is progression. It is trying to teach us." Isolde's eyes flew open. Her voice was hushed, trembling. It wants to be understood. For hours they watched, recording, sketching, listening. The forest repeated its sequences tirelessly, shifting, elaborating, pausing as though waiting for a reply. At last, Isolde rose. Her heart pounded, but she did not hesitate. She knelt at the pool's edge, lowered her hand into the water and traced a circle. The glow rippled outward, spiraling. The vines above responded instantly, shimmering in a spiral of their own. Then they pulsed the original 3, pause 3. Isolde gasped, tears in her eyes. It knows, we answered. Malik whispered, almost reverently, we are in dialogue. The explorers stared at one another, the enormity settling upon them. They had not merely discovered life. They had been discovered in return. As night descended, the clearing filled with light. Vines, moss, blossoms, pool, every element glowed in harmony, weaving sequences that stretched beyond comprehension. It was as though the entire forest had turned its attention upon them, waiting, teaching, welcoming. They were no longer wanderers in an unknown world. They were guests. Dawn bled slowly into the clearing, though the forest's glow never truly dimmed. The pool shimmered softly, the vines hung still, yet all 4 explorers felt the weight of expectancy pressing down like a held breath. Malik broke the silence first, sketchbook balanced across his knees. It waits for us, that much is clear, but what can we possibly give it in return? Ari tapped his scanner, though his eyes never left the glowing vines. Not data, it does not need our numbers, it has its own mathematics. The only thing we can offer is pattern in a form it does not already know. Aiton frowned. And if it misreads us, if it sees danger in what we send, Isolde answered softly, her gaze fixed on the pool. Every conversation is risk, yet silence is also a choice, and silence may seem like rejection. The forest pulsed faintly, 3, pause 3, as if to emphasize her point. They gathered at the pool's edge. Ari proposed creating a sequence with light. Malik suggested shapes drawn in the water. Isolde leaned toward sound, something wholly human, something this world had not yet heard. They debated until the vines shimmered with a new pattern, 4 pulses in quick succession, followed by a pause, then a single long glow. It repeated patiently, waiting. It is growing impatient, Ari said, his voice tight. It adds layers each time we hesitate. Aiton's jaw tightened. Then act, choose something and act. Isolde inhaled, then began to hum. Soft at first, barely more than a whisper, but steady. The note rose, curved downward, then rose again. Her voice carried across the clearing, pure, fragile human. The pool rippled. Light surged from its depths in spirals that mirrored her melody, responding with rhythm rather than pitch. Isolde's hum faltered in shock, but Malik's eyes lit. It answered, keep going. She steadied her breath and continued, weaving notes like threads. Each rise and fall sent ripples across the pool, and each ripple drew an answering shimmer from the vines. Ari stared, mouth open. It cannot perceive sound directly, it perceives vibration. Her voice carries into the water, and the water carries it into the network. Aiton watched closely, one hand hovering near his blade, though no threat presented itself. His eyes flicked between the glowing patterns and Isolde's trembling form. The dialogue of hum and light continued, fragile but undeniable. The vines shimmered in spirals, paused, shimmered again. Isolde's voice wavered but grew stronger, each note a leap of faith. Finally, the forest stilled, the vines dimmed, the pool's glow calmed to a steady radiance, neither advancing nor retreating. It heard, Isolde whispered, lowering her voice to silence. I do not know what it understood, but it heard. Malik exhaled shakily. We have given it something new, a shape of ourselves. Ari leaned forward, scanning the pool. The energy shifted, stabilized. That was not mimicry, that was comprehension. Aiton finally spoke, his tone low but certain. Then it will expect more. The forest seemed to agree. The vines pulsed faintly, this time not in fixed rhythm, but in long, flowing sequences. They cascaded across the clearing, weaving patterns of staggering complexity, like sentences stretched across 1,000 voices. Ari's scanner wailed, unable to capture it all. He shut it off in frustration. It exceeds us, too vast, too quick. Isolde pressed her palms together. Then perhaps we should not rush to master it. We should learn to listen longer before we try to speak again. But Malik was restless. His hand hovered over the pool, fingers trembling with the urge to draw shapes, to contribute more. What if this is the moment? What if it wants us to answer now? Aiton caught his wrist, firm but not harsh. We do not throw words into a language we cannot read. That is not dialogue, it is shouting into the dark. Malik glared, but his hand fell back to his side. The forest continued its cascade of light, flowing endlessly, patiently. It did not demand, it only offered. The explorers watched until their eyes ached, each carrying a different burden. Malik, the yearning to create; Ari, the struggle to understand; Isolde, the hope of communion; Aiton, the weight of protection. As night fell, they sat close by the fire, the glow of the forest reflecting in their weary faces. "We stand at the edge of something vast," Isolde whispered. "Not just life, not just mind, a different way of being." Aiton's voice was steady, almost grim, "and we must decide whether to step across that edge or hold back." Silence followed, broken only by the forest's endless, patient pulse. Morning arrived softly, wrapped in mist and muted green light. The forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting. The explorers rose quietly, each sensing the weight of what awaited. The pulse beneath their feet was stronger now, steady and deliberate, almost like a heartbeat calling them onward. Aiton led them along the path marked by faintly glowing vines. The further they went, the more the patterns grew deliberate. Arches of light formed natural corridors, spirals unfolded along branches overhead, and the moss underfoot glowed in sequences that mirrored the pulse beneath. The forest was guiding them, step by careful step, deeper into itself. Malik's sketchbook was abandoned in his pack. Words and lines failed to capture the complexity before him. He walked with open eyes and open hands, letting the jungle impress itself upon him directly. Ari, for once, set aside his instruments, realizing no scanner could measure the consciousness before them. Isolde's fingers brushed every leaf and branch she could reach. She felt the pulse of sap and electricity alike, the flow of thought across vine and moss, a rhythm that resonated through her chest. For the first time, she understood that the forest's language was not merely light or sound or vibration. It was life itself, expressed in every subtle pulse, every spiral of growth. After hours, or perhaps days, time was strange beneath the canopy. They arrived at a clearing unlike any they had seen. Trees rose impossibly high, their trunks smooth and glimmering with veins of light. Vines wove among them in intricate networks, and at the center lay a pool, vast and still. Its surface reflected the glowing branches like a mirror of the sky, though the sky was nowhere to be seen. The pool's glow pulsed 3 pores, 3, the familiar signal, but now it added a final sequence, a single, steady, unwavering light. It did not pulse, it waited. Isolde stepped forward, heart hammering. She knelt at the edge and placed her hands in the water. The light surged, rippling outward in waves that echoed through every root, branch, and vine in the clearing. She closed her eyes, feeling a presence vast and patient, aware and welcoming. It was not threatening, it was not judgmental. It was curiosity, intelligence, and memory wrapped together in a single living mind. It had existed for eons, quietly shaping the jungle, observing, waiting, and now it had chosen to reveal itself. Malik knelt beside her awestruck. "It is perfect," Ari whispered almost to himself, a mind in every leaf, every branch, life expressed as thought. Aiton stood slightly back, vigilant, but he too felt it, the pulse beneath the ground, the subtle hum in the air. The forest did not demand obedience. It demanded recognition, understanding, connection. Isolde's breath caught. She raised her head, eyes shining. "We have discovered life in its purest form, not just survival, but consciousness woven into existence itself." The pool shimmered one final time, sending a ripple that danced across the clearing, through the moss, along the vines, and into every trunk and leaf. The pulse slowed, returning to the steady, gentle heartbeat that had guided them here. They sat together in silence, listening, watching, absorbing. Words were unnecessary. Thought and attention were enough. For the first time, they understood something profound. The secret of life was not a formula to be written down or a substance to be collected. It was the pattern, the pulse, the intelligence hidden within the web of existence itself. It was everywhere, in every vein of the forest, waiting for someone to notice. As night fell, the clearing glowed gently. The explorers, for the first time since their arrival, did not feel fear or isolation. They had been welcomed, acknowledged, and shown the truth of the forest. And though they would return eventually to their world of instruments and words, the memory of this living mind would never leave them. In the quiet pulse of the jungle, they rested, knowing they had glimpsed life itself, and that in some way it had glimpsed them in return. The forest waited, patient, infinite, alive.